After Donald Trump's uniquely aggressive interaction with CNN's Jim Acosta at this week's press conference, I think a lot of people are wondering what this says about how he'll interact with the media generally during his presidency. And I know I can only speak for myself, but I will say I hope others are also worried about his commitment to the First Amendment and free press. After all, everybody laughs when you mock CNN because, look, we criticize CNN all the time, and I think rightly so. There's a lot of great reasons to do so. But if he can mock CNN in that way, as if they're nothing, during a press conference, who is there that he can't do that to? And when he feels free to do it, he's going to continue to do it. And so it was a bit of an ominous event for me. Now, we're going to turn to some different perspectives on what happened, what might happen going forward. We're going to start with one who loved what Trump did earlier this week, and that is Newt Gingrich. And so here he is.
What did you think of this press conference today? I thought Trump just demolished them.
I think there are a couple of big lessons here that I hope Sean Spicer, the new press secretary, is going to look at very carefully. In baseball, in football, in hockey, in basketball, if certain players behave inappropriately, you kick them out of the game. I think that in hockey, it's fairly common to bench them for a certain amount of time. I think that the way Acosta behaved today for CNN, they ought to suspend him for 60 days. Just say, we'll let CNN send somebody else. But just as a signal, frankly, to all the other reporters that there are going to be real limits. And when you get beyond those limits, you ain't going to be there. I mean, they don't need to put up with this. They shouldn't put up with this. It's bad for the country.
So, I felt he destroyed him, and he should destroy him. That's a healthy.
Send a lesson to send a message to the other reporters.
Yeah.
Don't speak up. The irony: every reporter at every news conference should behave like Jim Acosta. Mm-hmm. Everyone should behave like Jim Acosta did.
Yeah,
that's 1,000% true. I mean, this is just Newt Gingrich doing everything he can to stay irrelevant, but it's this notion that somehow because he asked a question and he was persistent, he should be somehow left on the sideline. That's his job. That's what he's got to do. And Jim Acosta, had to have helped his stock with this because he's a really hardworking journalist who's there everywhere. Not very many people know Jim Acosta.
I was not familiar.
Yeah, and now they do. But he's every single night he's on CNN giving a report from the field about this, and he's been covering Trump a lot. And that's just it. And you've heard of all the antidotes to this kind of thing. It's tell the person next to you, I'm going to ask this. If he shuts me down, you ask it. I mean, that's how it should be because you have to get the answers to these questions.
You kind of have to do that kind of thing because Trump kind of loops in all the media together. Like, he doesn't really differentiate between who he hates and who he doesn't. He just kind of hates everyone who criticizes him. And so, he's not just going to stop with CNN.
No, there's a lot of reasons he wouldn't like Fox News, by the way. I'm sure he loves Sean Hannity personally, but he has probably a lot of beef with Fox News generally.
Suppose you get thrown out. Who cares? Like, really, who cares? The feed is available. You can still cover it. You have Jim Acosta watch it, feed it, write about it. Talk about what, your questions don't matter more than anybody else's questions. You're just the guy working there, right? So it doesn't matter, man. Take the grief if that's what comes, but don't be afraid. And the hand-wringing, and any journalist who is not siding with Jim Acosta has no business in that room. None. And I was terrible at that. I would have gotten intimidated.
I would not have done what Jim Acosta did. I would have just been stunned. Because remember, Jim Acosta's interaction was right after his entire network had been trashed by the president and called fake news. And so he had the temerity to ask for a question, a follow-up perhaps. And that is what so threw off this man-child of a president. Yeah, look, I tweeted earlier, I've mentioned this on the show already. I tweeted right after that was horrifying, and I can't imagine why anyone in the mainstream media or new online media would not be horrified at how casually he disregarded the press. And Piers Morgan said, we need to grow a pair about our concern over the First Amendment and the continuation of free press.
So which side what does that make? Which
God
side?
only knows. But he's
on
a
the
representative
other side of the Atlantic. So
yeah, exactly.
Was he supporting Jim Acosta, or was he?
No. He thinks that if you're concerned about this, you should grow a pair. And by the way, I don't even care about him. He's just a representative. I've seen people in the online media who, because they don't like CNN, can't see you. Not everything has to be black and white, okay? There are shades of gray. You can dislike a lot of things about a media outlet and still think that they have a right to be present in there or a right for some sort of respect. And if you will not defend them, they will come for you next, eventually. Trump will get around to the online news outlets once he's totally destroyed CNN and the rest of them. And the fact that people are willing to just preemptively just throw down their arms because it's fun to watch CNN get made fun of, that is scary, scary stuff considering what we're looking forward to in the next few years.
Very quickly, Fox, they're such clowns, man. I mean, the stuff that they were running while Sean Hannity and Newt Gingrich were having their simpleton conversation of the context-free WikiLeaks revelations about various things that had happened involving Democrats and Clinton is, again, I mean, that little thing they were running, that's a great version of fake news. It's true, many of those things are true to an incredibly small extent, right? But they're providing absolutely no context. They don't even have context to the emails, which is why it was irresponsible, I think, to run those emails in general in the manner in which they were run. Some of them were revealing, some of them you didn't need context to, but many of them you did. But Fox just puts these list of 10, 15 things up there that, again, just sort of reinforce the notion, right, that Hillary was, that it was corrupt and that the emails, while everyone who read them in their entirety thinks they revealed a political campaign and maybe a poorly run political campaign and embarrassing moments, but suggests that there was widespread corruption and favoritism toward Hillary Clinton, when we know the stories themselves don't reflect that the way that she was portrayed enormously negatively.
And again, context
sometimes
matters.
justifiably, but
yeah, all that we have every reason to believe that every single one of those emails is factually correct. But at the same time, we also know that all of the mainstream media outlets spent the last 2 weeks of the election talking about the Comey investigation, the new revelation that she might be indicted, without any information. The skepticism that I see about the Russia hacking was entirely absent at that point. And so, yes, CNN and MSNBC, who did collude in some ways with the Clinton campaign, also spent the most important 2 weeks of the election trying to destroy her because it was interesting news. So you need to understand the pros and the cons there. But I do want to move on to a little bit more of this debate about the media. So here is Sean Spicer and what he thinks should happen to Acosta.
No one needs to be treated with that level of disrespect and rudeness. I think Mr. Acosta owes the president-elect and, frankly, the entire press corps an apology for his childish and inappropriate behavior.
That makes sense.
I saw a lot of prominent journalists attacking CNN after this whole debacle, and I was like, I feel like you're playing right into Trump's hands. Like, he wants us to turn on each other.
Yeah.
Well, it's great when you hear a Trump spokesman talk about rudeness also. I mean, the sort of bald hypocrisy there is incredible. Just that Sean Spicer can sit there. Sean Spicer, who, by the way, danced around Donald Trump for most of the primaries until Donald Trump lost, and then Donald Trump won, and then he didn't really know what to do. Sean Spicer.
Until who lost?
Until Donald Trump lost.
Oh, right.
In other words, he was waiting for Donald Trump to lose. Donald Trump didn't lose. Spicer got demoted because of the Trump campaign and then sort of put back because of them as well. And now he's talking about rudeness. It is the most hypocritical thing that could possibly be done. It's also Sean Spicer doing his job. He's now the spokesperson for Donald Trump, whatever that means. And that's what he does for a living. But when you see it in this context, it's absolutely unacceptable because it is so hypocritical.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I want to get ready. If you can jump to video 9. I love that JR noticed this, because I don't think a lot of people watching this clip you're going to see notice this. We've seen now online, fake news is simply applied to anything that you don't like, whether it's true or not, but also I found most interestingly, whether it's news or not. You express an opinion, it's fake news. But that is not just online, as you'll see in this clip.
Go sort of all over the place on this. They're just not in command of the facts. But you know, I will tell you that
we got people just on the street yelling out fake news at the backs of people on live TV. I think we're moving into a really healthy media environment for our government.
To correct a little bit of fake news, by the way, just very quickly, the NHL hockey, they don't bench players who break a rule on their own team. Teams don't bench their players. You get a penalty from the ref, and that's it.
That's the manner. I'm constantly explaining to the referees when she's watching football, my daughter, and she'll be like, why do they, for when they break rules. I'm like, they're not really breaking the rules. Breaking the rules is part of the game, and then they get penalized for it.
Yeah.
Right? It's a little tricky for a 3-year-old.
Well, she's watching her tuition.
I mean, look, we have.
I like that.
We are reaping what we sowed in journalism with nonsensical television journalism for 30 years now. There are some people who stand out now, but that that pool is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The years I worked in local news, things got dumber and dumber and dumber. I still watch it. So, you know, you put enough beautiful people with blown dry hair and women wearing skirts that look like they're going out for clubbing, and men who look like they have, you know, their hair is matted on like Ben Nelson, and everyone looks and acts plastic and perfect and moronic. And you know what? So this attaches, and now Jim Acosta is out there trying to do a good job, but he is fighting against a wave of inauthenticity, of telling dumb stories, of dumbing down important stories or ignoring important stories. And the news media is left with very little credibility. And the Republican Party, wisely, sometime in the 80s, recognized that, hey, we can weaken their credibility even more because they are in our way. And it worked. And Democrats have not helped or stood up to it in an effective way. And there are very few television broadcasts worth watching. And yet it is where all of us, for years and years and years and years, got the majority of our news. Mercifully, there's a lot of stuff online now, but of course there's also a lot of drivel online too. And this is the result of that. It's very easy to see these people and just presume these are your presumption would be these are pompous people. I was going to use, I'll just go with that. These are pompous, unattached people without any resonance with any sort of regular Americans, and that what they're saying isn't true. And so, yeah, she gets to yell fake news, and I know that term is caught on now, but this is, we bear an enormous responsibility for this, and all you got to do is watch the 11 o'clock news in whatever town you live in, and you'll see how we created this.
Help us with Operation Watchdog. Help us hire 4 new reporting teams. We could be the watchers on the wall. Make sure we keep Trump and the establishment in check. TYTnetwork.com/go.